Robert, thank you so much for joining us once again on the podcast. How are you, brother?
Good to see you, mate. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. What, 2 or 3 years, maybe?
hmm
And
hmm
a lot's
It was
happened.
like the beginning of a lot's happened. Holy cow!
I've been trying to keep up with all of your uh, all of your adventures,
I've
and
definitely been on quite a few adventures.
you certainly have. And one thing I wanted to start off with was talking about the connections that you've made over the last 3 years, because
Mhm.
from my perception, the last 3 years have been very turbulent, but out of that turbulence has come what I like to call the perfect recipe nearly. It's these wonderful ingredients, these wonderful human beings all across the planet that seem to be merging into the same pot. And we're starting to see and smell the delicious aroma of those ingredients coming together. And I wanted to talk to you about that, about your connections over the last few years, people like Richard Rudd and others that you seem to have um, started these beautiful conversations with and sharing them out to the greater public.
Mhm.
And yeah, how has that been for you, these connections over the last few years?
It's been uh, kind of an unexpected, in a way, an unexpected, wonderful surprise. I didn't expect to have met Richard, but it's like when you get into this journey of life and you start to just accept the journey that you have and trust the universe, then all kinds of things come your way. And you can't know how all of it was supposed to connect together until you get a little bit farther down the road and can look back at the road in retrospect. And I'd say that's been just one of the great blessings of this whole journey for me, has been to meet some pretty phenomenal people along the way, friends, mentors, and the like. It's really been a blessing.
And what do you put that down to from a I guess from a larger perspective, especially in relation, I guess, to the last few years of this sort of unraveling of threads, or this new foundation that is being built by yourself and for others?
I would say that when you finally get to the stage where you are in acceptance generally of yourself, because it's very difficult to get all the way there, then your life mission, your purpose, everything starts to become very clear. And when you're in alignment with that, then you start to reflect in the world around you different kind of people. The people that come your way are not the same as the ones that you met before. They tend to be more conscious and of higher awareness. And so along that journey, you have help from those people along the way. And they're also living their truth and their path. And I think it's really about living totally authentic. And it's such a beautiful aspect of this experience. When you start to realize that we're not here to become better judges. We're here to learn how to love. We're here to learn how to be loved. And that's the real purpose of this experience. It is that purpose. And also the ancillary benefit is that the universal one, becomes more and more wise because it's able to observe itself through our eyes. And our eyes are all unique. There's never been another Robert. There never will be another Robert Grant. There'll never be another Pete Evans. And there was never one before. So you are the amalgamation of all of your unique conditioning biases, all of the traumas, all the difficulties as well that you experienced. And that is what true alchemy is. You start to realize that all of those things led to your unique perspective, which is serving the purpose of the universal one becoming more and more wise through understanding more of the facets of itself. Know thyself is not just an admonition to us. It's also something that extends all the way through to the absolute divine. And it's two words that sound very simple. That's very, very hard to know yourself. Because why? As Alan Watts said, because a knife can't cut itself. An eye can't see itself. A light cannot illuminate itself. All of these things, it's very difficult for you to perceive yourself. The conscious mind just simply cannot perceive itself fully. That's the nature of the conscious mind. So starting to look past the mirrors, you start to realize that the people that you thought were separate from you are really just reflections of what's going on the inside of you.
When you talk about purpose, and I think we might have discussed this last time we were chatting, the definition of purpose, because I think a lot of people, myself included, have grappled with this notion of what are we here to do? And you said, fundamentally, we are here to learn how to love and receive love and be love. And is it as simple as that, the definition of our purpose in life? And when people grapple or are challenged with what they're here to do, and with that terminology of purpose, how would you advise people on their journey to find their purpose, and is there a purpose?
Here's the beautiful thing. I used to think that, there were coincidences. Now I realize that all the times I thought things were coincidence were really just because I was too close to the tree to see the forest. I needed to zoom out and see the macro picture to be able to see how things were connecting, how the dots might connect, looking at things in the retrospect, a constant examination and re-examination of the pathways of my own life. What are the patterns that I start to perceive? And then as you get closer and closer to those patterns, you start to realize the paternity of our existence. And that's what pattern comes from. It's from the paternal aspect, right? The matter is from the maternal aspect. But we need to be able to combine both. It's the heart and the brain learning to perceive together through this throat that we have. That's like a bridge that connects our heart and our brain. And as we do, we start to see and perceive the world differently. We start to feel empathy more for other people and other positions that we thought we could never have felt empathy for. And then we realize that all of the things that we had learned and maybe even experienced as being painful, like mathematics, math without meaning is just information. But math with meaning, and in particular, divine meaning, becomes divine communication. And we start to see that through experience after experience of synchronicity that start to weave a tapestry of experience, this mosaic that we've been putting together like a gigantic puzzle that we've been missing pieces on. Now, all of a sudden, all those missing pieces seem to fall irrevocably into place. And that's when you know you're living in alignment to your purpose. That's also when the things that you had previously experienced as painful are transmuted into purposeful. The path of awakening, as Richard Rudd says, is a series of softenings, and I added to that transmutes pain into purpose. Because the things that you thought had no purpose, or the difficulties, or when something happened that was really, really painful, you have to be able to turn that lead into gold. That every experience we have, even the most difficult, even the most tragic, has a seed of beauty hidden within it, and it's our job to find it and ferret it out, to see the silver lining. That is the way that I can tell you that is the most powerful way of living in a conscious world, in a conscious life, is being able to find the purpose behind all that is. And once you do, then everything in your life will fall into an alignment that is like beyond your wildest dreams.
Yeah, I was talking to a dear friend yesterday about, and he's going through some personal troubles at the moment, and extreme pain, and doesn't know the way out. And I offered the perspective, or to contemplate about what this might be offering him in this particular point in time, that this too shall pass, but through this pain that he is suffering at the moment, that there is that nugget of gold that is waiting to be discovered. How would you talk to somebody like that when they're unaware or find it very difficult to be able to peer into themselves to find that nugget of gold or that nugget of wisdom?
Well, first of all, for someone who has a hard time empathizing with themselves, the most important thing you can do is to give them empathy. The world's not a difficult place because, at least in my perspective, the world's not a difficult place because people truly hate each other. I think it's because largely people hate themselves that it becomes a very painful place. Our self-hatred tends to get projected all around us in our experience. And so what I would say is, first and foremost, is I would try to express to that friend how much you care for that friend in a very sincere way without any judgment. Try your best to feel exactly what it is they're feeling. Listen with your heart, not with your head. You know, as men, it's difficult for us because I have this condition. It's really kind of funny. I suffer from something called narcolepsy. And narcolepsy is when it's kind of the opposite of what most people experience. So, in a very stressful situation, my heart rate drops, my blood pressure drops. I feel, you know, really, really relaxed. When it's a very, boring situation, I start getting anxious, right? And my heart rate increases. So I have an opposite response to, stimulus than other people do. And it's always been the source of, joking around my office, in fact, because people know, uh-oh, things are going to get tough. We better get Robert a pillow. He's going to go to sleep. Because I'll literally pass out. I start getting really, really drowsy and I start falling asleep. It's not a joke. And it's a problem when you're married, because whenever there's a problem with, your wife, and all of a sudden, for me, a very stressful situation is to have to deal with emotional issues, at least in the past, that have no solution. Because sometimes women don't want to have their problems solved, or at least the women I've been married to don't want to have their problems solved per se. They just want them to be heard. And to me, that was like excruciatingly painful, because it's like, why am I going to sit here and go through this torture and listen to this when there's no solution to this? So then my physiological response would be I'd start falling asleep. That didn't exactly end well, right? You can imagine, when people ask me all the time, it's like, how much is a half of a half of a half? And I say 3 divorces or 2 divorces, right? That's basically the way it works. You end up with, that's kind of like divorce math. And probably that's what I experienced, because I did not have the ability to listen empathetically to people's issues. I could be the best friend. I'd be there for you if you needed me. And I would be the first person to help solve the problem. I would always be there. But when it comes to just feeling through your pain, that was my difficulty. That was my vulnerability. So I had to learn how to get more and more connected. I had to get more connected to my heart. It wasn't that it wasn't there. It was definitely there. We all have it. It was just that I had such a strong response in the logos, which was, if you can't solve it, just avoid it. And that's one of the things we all do. Well, I was once told when I was 25 years old, every rung that you skip on the ladder of life, you'll eventually have to go back and revisit. And every feeling that you should have felt but didn't feel because you avoided it will have to be touched as well. So this is the experience that we're going through. We're learning how to be more empathetic. We're learning how to listen with our hearts. We're learning how to be there in different ways, not just to solve problems, but to empathize, truly empathize. And, it's more difficult for some than it is for others. I was probably in the camp where it was more difficult, but I've been working on that. And I think the circumstances in the world have also lent towards a situation that is now making it easier for all of us to feel pain that other people are experiencing, particularly right now. It's very painful to watch what's happening in the Middle East. And I think before I had such a strong cognitive bias as a supporter of, what we had always been told here in the United States were, our allies, Israel. I have friends in Israel. My best friend is from Israel. And it's very painful to watch the way that this is happening right now. Not because I'm obviously the events of October 7th were horrific and tragic, but now the events that are going on are not only plunging us into what will likely become a world war, but it's very painful because I'm now seeing the other perspectives that I had shut myself off to for so long. Because it wasn't popular, it wasn't the friends I chose. It's like I was born into this world and I was already on Team Israel. And what I'm now going through is realization that we're not about picking sides. It's not a college football team or a soccer team that we're rooting for. The only side we can choose is humanity. And so for me now, it's like I feel empathy on both sides of that equation. And yet it's tragic to me on so many levels to see how the things that the Israeli people and their ancestors, only a generation or two back, had to fight against is now what they're on the verge of inflicting. And it's happening right now with Benjamin Netanyahu. And I just feel the pain. And obviously I don't want to see Hamas be successful in any way, shape, or form, but you have to realize that Palestine is 53% children. And doesn't everyone deserve to live? Obviously, there must be justice for the people that perpetrated the crimes, but the cost, the toll, and to have Benjamin Netanyahu talking about drawing comparisons to the story of Amalek in the Bible, which meant that every man, woman, and child need to be wiped out because they were against the children of Israel. This must end. This is not right. And I think it's a weird boomerang. And now we see Yemen has just now entered into and declared war with Israel just a few hours ago. And I don't think they'll be the only ones. I think that when you've got Benjamin Netanyahu quoting the Bible, at least the Old Testament aspect of it, you better get ready for the response will be biblical.
When you zoom out, and is it possible to zoom out on what's happening in the world at the moment and potentially see I don't like to say it, but the positives that will come from this eventually? I mean,
Look,
do you contemplate this?
Very much so. In fact, I fundamentally believe that for the world to go through its transition into higher consciousness, 5D consciousness, it will be brought to this place of extreme darkness. At the same time, the polarities will exist. For those that have the higher consciousness and have the higher awareness, they will not be touched by it. They will not experience it. They'll still see it. They'll see it from afar, like they're watching it on TV. But the horrors and tragedies, and watching it on their iPhones, the horrors and tragedies will become horrific. And in a way, we have to as well realize that there can be no light without darkness. There can be no higher light without despotism, without extreme judgment. The night is darkest just before the dawn. And I think that's where we are right now. We're in a dark, dark night. And I still think it's going to get darker still. But while this is happening, it's just like in every movie that we see with the hero's journey story. You have Lord of the Rings, and Gandalf the Grey falls down into the pit with the fire dragon. Everyone thinks he's dead, and then he comes back as Gandalf the White. And at the same time, that's when the orc army gets made. So as he comes back with Gandalf the White with more powers, more abilities, more resilience, at the same time, the world around became darker still. And what we have to realize is that what we believe, it was Saul Alinsky, who's a social agitator, who basically had a quote that goes like this: "Our world is not a world of angels, rather it is a world of angles. A world where men speak of moral principles yet act on power principles. A world where we are always moral and our enemies are always immoral." This is the game we've been playing with humanity since the beginning. What we believe is our ethical imperative is really just what benefits us the most. It has nothing to do with ethics. Coming back to this reality and realizing that, wait, so in order for the light to exist, there must also be darkness, because you couldn't even perceive the light if there were no darkness. The contrast is a critical aspect of it. And what we have to also comprehend then is that we are our own darkness. Yeah. One of my favorite lines from Batman Begins was when Two-Face basically says, "Hope that you live long enough to defeat the villain, but not so long that you become the villain." This happens so many times throughout history. And I find it fascinating because no villain throughout history ever considered themselves a villain. The villain always perceived himself a hero. And when we look at it from the perspective like a great play like Phantom of the Opera, where you've got a man who's wearing a mask that's literally turning his face into a yin-yang shape. The whole thing's like yin-yang. And at the end, everyone claps the most for Phantom. Because what Phantom really wanted was to be loved unconditionally. And when Christine came to him at the very end, while her boyfriend was, tied up to the gates and shackled there, she comes up to Phantom of the Opera and she kisses him. She showed him love when no one else did or would. And that softened his heart enough that he let them go. And that was a final scene. It's like a heart-wrenching scene. Because all of us, that's all we want, is to feel loved and accepted. And yet what happens is the more we hate ourselves internally, the more we lash out at everybody else. The more self-loathing we experience through narcissism, because narcissism is truly self-loathing. It's not self-love. Narcissism is when you believe you're projecting only a certain aspect of yourself that no one else might be able to see the negative aspects of you, but they all do. You're the only one that can't. Because a knife can't cut itself, and eyes can't see itself, and light can't illuminate itself, and fire can't burn itself. This is something that we all have to start realizing, that what we believed were facts, American apple pie and all of the things that go along with fireworks and 4th of July and all that stuff, we now have to start realizing that was just the narrative we're telling ourselves. And there's a whole different way to perceive it. And we've been turning a blind eye to all the atrocities we've been committing, the corruption, the wars that have been perpetrated. I can sit here and complain about Benjamin Netanyahu, but the truth is George Bush did no better. And we, as a populace letting it happen, we're basically turning a blind eye to what we didn't want to see. After 9/11, everybody, and for all those kids out there that think 9/11 was fake, I was there. It wasn't fake. And after 9/11, everybody pulled together and it was just like, we want revenge. So you can understand there was like some really, really angry hatred that was going on at the time. We're like, let's just go, I don't care. Let's go kill some Arabs type of thing. That's how the whole country was acting at the time. So that's exactly what happened. George Bush wanted a war. So he got his war. And probably just like Benjamin Netanyahu was warned 3 days before by the Egyptian government that it was going to happen from Gaza, and then move the troops to the West Bank. So the gates were literally left open. Come on. He got the war he wanted. The whole country was out asking for his ouster 2 months before in demonstrations. How soon we forget. And now all of a sudden the whole country slipped to the right wing and in solidarity with a tyrant. Come on. But we all have to recognize that every one of us has a hero and a villain within. I'm not afraid of people that have darkness within them. We all have darkness. There's not a single person on this earth that has more or less darkness than anyone else. Everybody's got an equal amount. Some people are willing to acknowledge it and are aware of it. Some people try to push it out of themselves so much that they can't even see that they have it. Those are the people to be worried about. The people that say they're only the light and not the dark. I know I'm dark. I know I have darkness. I accept my dark aspects. I accept the fact that I've been through divorces. I expect the fact that I am flawed, irrevocably so. As Alan Watts puts it, we all have this indomitable sort of rascal within us. But the person who doesn't know he's a rascal is the person to be most concerned about.
When you're talking about earlier about the parts of the ladder or the rungs on the ladder that we don't feel or don't acknowledge, and then there will be a time to revisit that in our course of our journey. That would be the same as what you're talking about collectively as the human race. As you're talking about that for thousands of years, we've gone through iterations of these types of wars and challenges. Do you think it's inevitable that this will just keep continuing on until is it something we need to heal? Is it a trauma collectively? Or is it individually that you believe that that is the path forward? Well, is there a path, I should say?
You can go back in time, 4,000 years, 4,500 years, time of Abraham. Imagine there are two shepherds on a hillside. And if you've never been to the Middle East, I don't recommend going, to Israel at this time right now. But if you've never been, it's a great place to visit, because when you go to Jerusalem, you really notice that Jerusalem is truly an oasis. And I mean it as such. So you literally have a W-shaped valley, shaped like a W. And you've got the Valley of Kidron and the Mount of Olives that looks on across the Temple Mount. If you go over the mountainside, just here, where the Mount of Olives on this side, the Temple Mount's here, if you go over this, across this ridge, it's desolation. There's nobody there. It's like you can't live there. It's not even arable land. It's horrifically bad. You do the same thing on the other side of the W, same problem. So no wonder people fought over this place, because it's landlocked by desert in a way. And the only connection of the lifeline through it is the Jordan River that allows you to sort of survive in this place. So you've got this thin strip of land. And of course, everyone wants the nice land. So imagine you've got two shepherds, one guy on the hillside that gets the most sun, and it's been a particularly punishing summer. And then the other guy on the other hillside is somehow shaded. Some years it goes the other way around. It really just depends on the circumstance. and how many trees are there and everything else. And so the guy that looks at his pastures and says, man, my pastures looked pretty bad, and I wish I had his pasture. Then my sheep could survive, then my family could survive, but I wouldn't have to worry about, not making it through this difficult time. So then he goes to sleep that night and he wakes up in the morning. He says, I've had a dream. God came to me in my dream last night and told me that the guy, my neighbor who has the nice pastured land, that land needs to be consecrated to God. And he worships a different God. He's evil. Therefore, I have to kill him and take his land and consecrate it to my God. Sound familiar? We justify whatever it is that we want for ourselves and call it the ethical imperative. And the more we can throw religious dogma behind it, the more justified it becomes. So how do we break out of this cycle? That's a great question. And I think that the best way that we can start to break out of that cycle is to start to realize that the universe, the all, is mental. Every experience that we have is tied to our belief system. In this life, we don't get what we deserve, we get what we expect. If we expect scarcity, we will experience scarcity. Whatever we believe more strongly, could be our optimism bias or our pessimism bias, is going to be what manifests. So even if you've got this great idea in your mind, if you have more bias of, gosh, this is going to be another failure, because just like when I thought Santa Claus was real when I was 6 years old and my hopes were dashed and I learned that he wasn't real at all. And then, this is now going to be like every other disappointment I've ever had. You will get that disappointment. We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. So the more we start to reconcile with ourselves and feel the feelings that we haven't allowed ourselves to feel, and we start to accept who we are and no longer judge ourselves with harshness. As we stop judging ourselves with harshness, then the world around us is also going to be less subjected to our harsh judgments. In this life, we can live for so long until we finally realize that we will attract everything we judge until we no longer judge everything we attract. So the way to get out of this is a journey within. It's to start realizing that the world is only scarce because you believe it as so. There are two types of people that believe in miracles and people that don't. I can tell you one thing for certain. The people that believe in miracles may not experience them every day, but they probably have experienced some in their lifetimes. But the people that don't believe in miracles at all will never, ever experience a miracle.
I want to ask you about the mystery, because I've heard you talk about that. You believe that potentially we might be, or possibly, or 100%, that we might be living in a virtual simulation of some type. I want to ask you about the mystery of that comment or that belief. And do you think it's imperative for us to have mystery in our life, that perhaps we shouldn't want to know it all, or perhaps we never will know it all? Or is there something that I'm missing here about the mystery of life?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just correct you on this. I don't think we might be. To me, I irrevocably know that we're in a holographic simulation. And it's such an important thing when you finally come to that conclusion and you go, oh my gosh, everything now comes together. And it's not a simulation that's been made by someone else. It's made by us. We chose to be here. Imagine you want to learn something, another way of dealing with some difficulty or dealing with some challenge, because that's really when you're an infinite being and there's no death, what else do you do? You might as well play some games and play a little playhouse theater. And that's what I believe we are doing. We came here because we decided, and we decided every aspect. We decided that we were going to be rich or we're going to be poor. And that comes with a different type of challenge set. We're going to give ourselves certain strengths and talents, and then we're going to give ourselves certain flaws because that also makes us more endearing to the audience. We're going to put certain situations in our path that are going to be the thing that we needed to learn here the most, like love and acceptance. We all love to watch a good movie. You know, it was a long time that Tom Cruise only did movies that were hero's journey stories. They always had the same character flaws, the same character talents, the same everything. But we love the story because we somehow could identify with that. Once you start to see the patterns of your life, then you'll start to realize that, wait a minute, I've been living the same patterns over and over and over again. What is it I'm trying to learn? And the universe has this way, and this game is so amazing. Everything happens exactly on the time it's supposed to. And here's the good news. I don't believe that there are right and wrong choices for your life. I believe that what we call destiny is actually the free will of your higher self. It's what we decided to experience. Now, who are we to judge what one person would want to experience versus another? If we knew that this was truly a game, you know, we might have some fun with this, Pete. We might say, you know what? I died having sex with the love of my life, last 3 times dying. But this time I think I'm going to try something different. I want to die in a fiery cataclysm. I'm going to be in some, you know, space shuttle, like pressing the envelope for humanity. Or I'm going to, you know, get chased by the sheriff of Nottingham and be shot in the back by an arrow. If you've got thousands and thousands of lifetimes to experience, you might as well experience every single type. Why limit yourself? Not saying that dying having sex with your love of your life is not a fabulous way to go. Of course, that's what everyone would want. But I want to experience something a little spicier. So we choose different circumstances. We choose different learnings. We have a menu of learnings. And don't get stuck with this notion of judging why someone would choose what you didn't. You know, if I were a mountain climber, I would not be happy with just climbing the hill behind my house. I would want to take on Kilimanjaro. I'd want to go take on Everest, despite the fact that there are hundreds of frozen skeletons on the last part of the ascent. Because somehow by experiencing these things, it helps us to know that we're alive. It makes it more real. And I think a lot of us are probably here choosing this to be here at this time because we know what's coming. It's a crazy time right now. But it's also the most exciting time ever in the history of the world.
Mm. I agree with you on that, definitely. I've often said that the last few years is, yeah, you mentioned Tolkien's work of Lord of the Rings, which is one of my favorite books to ever have read. And I've said many times over the last few years, nothing, there's no movie that's been made over the last few years that is as dramatic, as thrilling, as comedic, as horrifying as what we're witnessing play out on the stage, and we all have a part to play in that.
Well said, man.
And I want to go back to what you said about there's no right or there's no good or bad decisions that we make. Tell me about that, because a lot of people procrastinate about making decisions and find it very difficult to make decisions. And obviously that's perfect for them as well. But can you zero in on that a little bit more for me, that there's no right or wrong decisions that we make in our life?
Everything is already set. I don't believe in the physics theory of multiverses, where there's a different universe for every choice I make. I'm a conservationist. I just do not believe that that is the way the universe would operate. That's not the way that it shows itself across every aspect of this world. In fact, there's some movies that I think are really great that explain this very well, but even Greek mythologies explain it very well. So the story of the 12 labors of Hercules, it's really worth going back and revisiting these things. These mythologies, like Carl Jung says, are archetypal stories for our lives that we should embrace. There's a reason why these mythologies have endured. And then the story of Hercules, do you know the story well?
I don't actually.
Okay, so in the story, the way it goes is Hercules is the son of Zeus with another woman, right? And I won't go into a lot of detail about the story, but Zeus had many, let's say, extracurricular activities, and one of them was that he definitely liked to bed beautiful women that were, human beings, and he was a god, so he could turn himself into a bull and steal Europa, or he could become a golden shower, that comes and visits, or he could turn himself into an eagle. He had all these abilities to find ways to seduce women. And he did so, and ended up fathering Hercules. And Hercules was, of course, this incredible baby. It was said that when he was in his baby crib, he ended up strangling two snakes, right from the crib as a little baby. And there were many times that Hera, the wife of Zeus, was angry about the fact that Zeus had fathered Hercules. So she put difficult tasks in the path of Hercules. And one of the things that she did when he was living in Thebes was that she turned his family through a magic spell. And he had children and a wife that he loved very much. And she turned them into monsters. They looked like these ugly monsters. But Hercules comes home and he sees the house full of these monsters. And what does Hercules do? Oh, where's my family? He couldn't find his family, so he slays all the monsters. And then he's horrified to learn and realize that the monsters he just killed were actually then turned back into his family members. So he killed his entire family. And so, but the part you don't often focus on in the story is that Zeus, from the very beginning, started saying, you know what? We've got too many monsters in the land. Too many monsters. We need a hero to rise up and smite all these monsters and get rid of them. This is before all of this happens, right? So the only way for Hercules to redeem himself is to perform these 10 labors that become 12 because 2 were not counted as labors. Right? It says something about the base 10 and base 12 system, but never mind. So he sets out on this journey. He's got to defeat the Hydra, right? Which has this beast that you cut off its head and then 3 more grow back in its place. He's got to do all these like crazy tasks to be redeemed. And if he's redeemed, then he'll be able to, come into Olympus and be accepted. And most importantly, he hated himself for having killed his family. He didn't realize that the reason why he killed his family was because Hera had cursed his family and turned them into these monsters that he slayed. So at many points in the story, she tries to thwart him. Hera does. But in every case where she tries to thwart him, it fails. And in fact, becomes the reason why he succeeds. There's a deep lesson in this. No matter how many times you can try to go back into the past and change the outcome of history, history is already set, and the outcome will always be the same. there's not this ability where you could go back in time. They've made lots of movies about this recently. Go back in time, and they've tried to do grandfather paradox problems, right? And in almost every case of the movies, they're unable to change the outcome. It occurs anyway. So I fundamentally believe that we all get stuck in this idea of thinking that the past and the present would maybe multiply or sum together, or maybe sum and multiply together to create a product that would be the future. But we often don't think of the notion that in order for the future to turn out that way, then the reverse must also be true. That the future determines the past as much as the past determines the future. It's a loop. And so we cycle through this all of our lives. And I fundamentally believe as well that we all have a number. We have a number, and I talked about this with Richard Rudd. And you have a number, I have a number. It's a prime number. And that number, taken to its reciprocal value, will have a long series number with a long repetition cycle in it that would be called a period. And it's a repeating pattern, like 1/7. 7 is prime. 1/7 is 0.142857. And those 6 digits repeat infinitely. And they always sum to 9 for prime numbers. In reciprocal periods, they always sum to 9. 142857 equals 27. And 2 plus 7 equals 9. Every prime number after 5 will do this without question. You can test it. I wrote a proof on it. In digital root, they'll always sum to 9, which represents completion. So prime numbers have these periods of completion, and this is like a repetition pattern in your life. Now imagine you got a very long number for your number that could be tied to your birthday, that's tied to your numerology, your astrology, that's tied to your location of your birth. And then that number taken to the third power becomes a third dimensional reference for you. And then 1 over that value becomes a long period of repetition. That very, very long period of repetition. Now, that long period of repetition would then represent the cycles in your life and the menu of learnings you chose now before coming here. It's all set. You can't change the pattern. Sometimes we can't see the pattern because we're too zoomed in to distinguish it from the rest. But if in a sea of randomness, which I don't really believe in randomness, because if in a sea of randomness you find one string of pattern, then as a mathematician, you have to now consider that the entire sea of what you had thought was random is now not random at all. And actually, all of it's just encrypted to obscure from your vision and awareness the notion that there is a pattern. And this is the game we create for ourselves. We're playing hide and go seek with ourselves to learn to experience through looking at different perspectives and to learn to return to the heart. Everyone has a different path, and everyone is their own hero in their hero's journey, whatever it is. Or their villain. Or they're the hero that call themselves something other than that because they don't know they're a hero yet. Or they're a villain that believes they're a hero. So I believe all of it's entangled. None of it is left to chance. Every decision is made. How else then can you describe and explain how you get synchronicities no matter where you go and what you do? I was driving to LA a couple days ago, and there was a bathroom. There was a porta potty on the side of the road. There was no other porta potties in the middle of the highway. No other porta potties, and this one had 137 painted on the side. Then 5 minutes further down the road, there was a Powerball sign, and the number on Powerball was 137. Right. Then I got to the parking lot, and I'm, driving into parking lot 137. Now, statistically, it's not probable that I would have seen during that day no less than 20 137s. I believe all of it is predestined. We create all of it. It's as if the movie has already been made and we're watching it play backwards and we think it's playing forwards.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. I've got one more question for you, if you don't mind.
Shoot, go ahead.
Egypt, are you still going? And if so,
Yes.
tell us about what you have planned to remember or to share or to experience, and the potential outcome of this journey.
Well, it's interesting because have you seen the stuff I've done recently on music related to the pyramids?
I have.
And that if you look at the pyramid slope angles, there are three, right, on the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid has a 51.85 degree angle. The others, Khafre and Menkaure, have 53.13, and Menkaure has 51.34. No one knows why they chose these angles. Well, if you look at music theory, you'll find that literally the first 6 musical intervals, would, when turned into triangles, create exactly those proportions. So the diminished fifth and the augmented fourth, the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth, the major third and the minor sixth, and then the doubling of the octaves as well, are all found. That would be 8 out of the 13 are found just on the Giza Plateau without looking at any other proportions other than the height versus its base. It is perfect. They are exactly the musical intervals that represent what we would consider to be the most fundamental aspects of creation of a musical scale. There's a few missing that are not accounted for, and we found those as well. And they're on a place called Abu Rawash, which is 8 kilometers north of Giza Plateau, where there are 2 destroyed pyramids that one of them has an angle of 60 degrees, the other one has an angle of 67 degrees. And those are both matching the positions that are missing, one of them being 3/2. So we have Menkaure is 5/4, Khafre Pyramid is 4/3. Then we're missing 3/2. And then we have 2/1 for the Great Pyramid, 2/1 pi. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When we include the Abu Rawash, it fills in the 3/2 through the square root of 3/2. And the other one that's missing is 6/5. And both of those pyramids sit on that plateau that's 300 feet higher than the Great Pyramid's plateau. So it looks down on Giza. One of those pyramids that had a 60-degree angle would have stood 600 feet high at its peak, which is 120 feet higher than the Great Pyramid. Imagine that. The tallest building in the world in recorded history for at least 4,500 years, probably 13,000 or more years, was actually surpassed by another pyramid that is 8 kilometers north. And the entire Nile is actually the Kundalini spine of Osiris that then goes into the Nile Delta and opens up into these 7 tributaries into the Mediterranean. The last place is the crown chakra, that's Abu Rawash. Looks down on Giza, and then we've got the throat chakra at Giza. And that's why it's all about the music. It's all about the music. The 2 pyramids that are destroyed there in Abu Rawash, they still have many of the concourses still there. So we know that they're there. We could measure what their slope angles would have been. But these also represent the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone has 2 representations. One is an equilateral triangle with a square inscribed within it and a circle within that. The other is a 5, 12, 13 triangle, the perfect triangle, the only triangle that in Pythagorean triplets actually shares its perimeter with its area value. It's the same one on the back of a dollar bill with the Eye of Providence on it. That pyramid is exactly right next to an adjacent, the Abu Rawash Jed pyramid. It's actually called the Jed Efre pyramid, like the Jed pillar raising the Jed. So we now know that each one of these pyramids has musical notes. And we actually have a mapping of all the musical notes. And we're going to go to each of these pyramids in December, and we're going to be singing these notes at each of the pyramids to activate them. I've done lots of activations of pyramids before. Lots. I've spent 14 nights inside the Great Pyramid. I've never done anything like this before. And even the people that are going to be there, their voice resonance is tied to their DNA, and that is also part of this multi-factor authentication.
And what do you believe is going to happen? And a deeper question, do you think you have created all of this for you to discover?
Yes, I do. You know, I found something just today. I don't know if you saw the post I did on the Mandelbrot set. But you know what the Mandelbrot set is?
I
A
don't, sorry.
fractal self-similarity. I could share it with you real quick here. But in fractal self-similarity, there's a mathematician who found that there's a design that the universe uses over and over and over again to repeat itself all throughout the universe. And no matter how much you zoom in on that, you'll still see the exact same shape. So imagine you were to zoom in on the edge of me, and you'd find a little version of me as you got closer and closer into the edge of me, right? Because that's how this works in this matrix. Well, the Mandelbrot set, I'll pull it up for you. Hopefully I can share. Yeah, looks like I can. So the Mandelbrot set is this right here. So if you were to see it on Wikipedia, it actually tells you that this is a self-similar fractal representation. Whoops.
Yep, I know what you're talking about now. You often see that
you've heard of it, right?
In psychedelic experiences too.
Oh, really? Okay. So that's what a lot of people would say, right? But it's this exact same set. So what I looked at is I was like, well, wait a minute. Let me look at these proportions. And I was pretty blown away when I realized that actually, just stop this for a sec. I was pretty blown away when I realized that the Mandelbrot set was matching exactly this thing right here. Here we go. Whoops. Why is it not playing for me? That's strange. Try this again. Okay. When I realized that the Mandelbrot set was actually a perfect match to this. So I looked at taking the Mandelbrot set all the way up to its smallest circles up here. And it goes on infinitely like that, but it fits all inside this. And I made a linear construction around it. And the linear construction looked really familiar to me. Turns out that the Mandelbrot set actually makes a triangle with 51.85 degrees, which is exactly the same as the Great Pyramid. So another way to express the Mandelbrot set, which is a more complex plane equation normally, would be just to say 2 over pi, 2 over 1 pi, makes the Mandelbrot set. So inside the proportions of the pyramid, now the Mandelbrot set was only discovered by Benoit Mandelbrot in 1980. That's mind-blowing. So then when you take it to the next level, you start realizing that actually it's this. The proportions, and this is the extension of the Mandelbrot set, along with the flower of life, it makes the perfect Mandelbrot set, which then also describes perfectly the circle of the earth, the moon, the sun, and their proportional ratios to each other. It's like remarkable. I just discovered this just literally last night and today.
And obviously it's not a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence. And so what I think we're really doing, why are we going to Egypt? We're doing a global throat chakra activation. The last pyramid there is the Menkaure pyramid, which is right here. And that pyramid represents transcendence of self. The Great Pyramid is self-awareness. The Khafre pyramid is self-actualization. And the Menkaure pyramid is self-transcendence. And it's transcendence of duality. It's being able to move beyond a dualistic experience, to turn lead into gold with the Philosopher's Stone. Because actually the true metaphor of the Philosopher's Stone is really to understand that every difficult experience that you're facing is actually what turns you into your most divine self. And it's based on this thing that relates to the square root of 2. The square root of 2 is the basis and foundation of duality. It's the notion that we have this experience of separation right from the time we're born, and we think that 2 and division is this like ugly, horrible thing. But actually, as we start to become more aware of why we're here, what we're doing here, we start to realize that the square root of 2 is actually an incredibly divine aspect when combined, in particular, with the square root of 3. Because the 2 together, the square root of 3 being the Trinity, the square root of 2 being what we think of as like devilish, right? The aspect of the devil. That's how we look at the world. But when we recognize that it's actually complementary to each other, and when we take the square root of 2 and we add it to the square root of 3, it actually gives us something very unique. The square root of 3 and the square root of 2, so square root of 3 and the square root of 2, sum to a number that's really close to pi. Now, you've probably heard of the golden ratio, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The Fibonacci golden number is 1.618. Well, this ugliness of the square root of 2, which is the same shape as the Saturn symbol, Saturnian, lead is its symbol. When we take the square root of 2 and we add it to the square root of 3, we get pi. So that's implying a circle. It's a close approximation for pi. And then when you look to see what degree is the square root of 2 referencing, it turns out to be 161.81 degrees when it's added to the square root of 3, which is the Trinity. The Trinity represents divine love, divinity. So somehow this ugliness of the square root of 2, the lead of the square root of 2, the difficulty, the challenge, gets transmuted to the golden ratio, the golden number. The square root of 2 turns from lead into gold. And that is what I believe we're now on the precipice of doing. There's a dramatic shift happening right now. We all know it. We all feel it. And for those that are prepared for this, and for those that chose this, because not everyone chose it. Not everyone chose it. You know, it's like, let's say that we're in that world before coming here, and we wanted to learn how to overcome betrayal and still love unconditionally. That would mean that someone's going to have to volunteer to be someone who betrays me in this world. Someone has to volunteer for that part in the play. And they're doing me a great service by betraying me. Because that is the thing, that is the lead that will then be the mechanism for turning into gold. Learning how to love through the betrayal is how we transcend the self. And it's not just about betrayal, it's about anything that we think is abhorrent, the things we don't like. It's just like we don't like the darkness of night because it's scary. So we try to avoid it. You want to make sure we're indoors before the darkness of night. It's not that it's bad. It's just uncomfortable for us. But it's precisely in the areas and things that we conduct ourselves in doing that is uncomfortable where we have the greatest growth.
I agree. Is there anything you'd like to add? I mean, you've been such a...
I want to ask you a question.
Please
because
do.
I know you were outspoken during COVID. And I know that you got like shadow banned and you dealt with a lot of stuff. And I want to ask you, how did you deal with that?
That's a great question. I trusted in the process, to be completely honest with you. Like you said before, there's no right or wrong decisions that we make. Sometimes I look back and think, did I have a choice to make during that period? And I always come back to the same realization, is that yes, I did have a choice. But if I had have chosen the other path, it didn't feel like the right path for me. I just knew that intuitively. And obviously there's been challenges along the path, financial, reputation, viewed through certain lenses and certain perspectives through the mainstream media as such. But honestly, what has manifested from those decisions is continuing to be a beautiful journey for myself. And over the last few years, we're talking about at the start of this conversation about the connections that have been made all across the globe with conducting interviews like this. It's been remarkable, the amount of information that I've been able to take in, like today, as a student of life. And parts of that I integrate into my own being and then use that to my benefit to help navigate my path forward. And it led my wife and I to open a beautiful little health retreat and wellness retreat on 200 acres of property in northern New South Wales in the rainforest. And I don't reach as many people as I once did, but I've had to let go of that as well. And the types of connections we make now over a weekend, when 6 or 7 or 8 guests join us for a weekend, is a very different experience and equally as rewarding as sharing information to millions of people, which I used to be able to do, whereas now it seems to be a very small group of people that I get to connect with, receive their information, receive their energy, and reciprocate it at the same time. So it's a very different path, but I see the personal growth for me over the last few years is so beautiful. As you talked about earlier, less judging of the world around us, but more being a curious viewer, so to speak, and voyeur of what's playing out, and still doing my part that feels like the right decisions for me on a day-to-day basis. And I'm not saying I still don't have my own challenges, because I have come to accept that that's part of the journey as well, being confronted by certain issues, whether it's what's out in the world or whether it's my own beliefs and patterns that I recognize and decide to work on or choose not to at this particular point in time. So it's a great self-awareness over the last few years, and I'm very grateful for the decisions that I've made over the years. Yeah, it's been a wonderful trip so far, and I love the mystery in it all. You know, that's why I asked you that question about the mystery, because I actually love the mystery of life, and I've learned to let go of trying to control every aspect of my life, because that was a pattern for me for so long, and it was one of the hardest ones for me to let go of and continue to let go of. And I'm still playing that role of control and let go, control, let go, and I love that aspect of it as well, because it keeps me on my toes, so to speak.
You know, it makes me think, I keep hearing these words. The mystery of what is to come is really just the history of what you've already decided and what you've already chosen. I don't mean it in a figurative sense. I mean in a literal sense. I truly believe that we are watching a film play backwards that we've already created from the very beginning, whatever that beginning is, maybe just with the intention or the choice of what we wanted to experience. So the beauty of the world, the real mystery, is to understand for me now why I chose what I chose. It's not why did this happen to me, because the world doesn't just happen to us. You know, we often believe the world happened to us, and you know, you start to realize over time that, well, what I experienced isn't really what happened to me, it's what I believe happened to me. And maybe there's a way for me to look at this in an entirely new light, which is that I always believed the world was happening to me previously. Now I understand that it's happening for me, even the difficult situations. And being able to transmute through that and turn the lead into gold is a powerful, powerful daily reminder that I always have to seek the question of why I chose what I chose. So the question I have for you is, why do you believe you chose it? And not in your conscious mind sense, but in your higher self sense.
Mm. Probably to be able to feel more and experience more and remember more and learn more. And yeah. Yeah, it's funny because, you know, some days I think I have it worked out, and then other days I'm like, fuck, here we go again, you know, another lesson. What haven't I learned yet? And there's an aspect and a part of me that quite enjoys that.
I see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm very curious by nature,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that I like to be surprised, and I like the unknown, and I like, as I mentioned before, I like the mystery. And you know, I love doing this, what we're doing right now, is having these conversations, because it puts me into that space of deep contemplation. And there's an aspect of that fills me with gratitude, but also it seems to fill me with strength as well. So it's these types of conversations. It's interesting because I haven't conducted a podcast interview for probably about 5 or 6 weeks. It just wasn't flowing for me, and I had to learn to let go. You know, why do I need to create content for the sake of creating content when something's not flowing? And it's so beautiful that you're my first guest back in, and it's like this spark again. It's like, yeah, this is exactly why this needed to happen today for me. You know, for me, these types of conversations are like a beautiful meal. It's delicious for me. I can taste it, and I'll remember this conversation for the rest of my life. And I don't take that lightly. So I really appreciate you
Likewise.
giving me the time to do this. I don't even know how many people watch these podcasts, to be completely honest with you. I've let that go as well, because I pretty much do this for my own selfishness. It's
Yeah.
so
And that's
be it.
okay. That's perfectly fine. That's the thing, is that we often think, oh, we can't do something for our own selfishness. No, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Just own it. Just own it. That's how I feel about life. It's like the problems we come into are the ones that we just can't own. And we want to make excuses for, because who are we really trying to prove something to? Just ourselves? It's letting go of all those attachments. I think just listening to your story, I'm already seeing you in your retreat center, connecting with people at a deeper level than maybe you ever have or could have done when you were in your mass communication stage.
I would agree with you there. I would agree with you. And it's interesting talking about attachment and detachment. My wife and I have discussed over the last couple of months, are we attached to this wellness center or retreat space that we have now, or are we willing to explore what else is out there? We've been doing it now coming up to 3 years, and we love it. But there's a part of me that as well that knows that attachment to something, a property or a business or something like that, can be a pattern that, or a belief that can unravel one day. And it's like, do we now go and explore something like that? Like, we've ticked that box and we loved what we've done, but what else can we possibly do out there in the world? What is it like if we actually don't do something for a year and actually hibernate, or hibernation's probably not the right word, but letting go of that and not being visible, not being seen, not being of service to others, and being of service to ourselves in a different way. And so we're contemplating that at the moment, and that's sort of a little scary, but also quite exciting. And we don't know what's going to happen, but we like exploring these types of things where we don't attach ourselves to something as well.
That's beautifully said. We all, it's funny, when I went to Dharamsala to meet Dalai Lama, I was with Lama Tenzin, and he said, here in India, you have all these monks that are these, Tibetan Buddhist monks. And some of them are wearing like, really new clothes. They look very new, and some look very tattered and old. And I said, so why are some people wearing very tattered and old clothes and others are new? They're like, oh, well, you don't want to look like you are, it's kind of like, if you're going to play Jesus, you've got to dress like Jesus. You're going to wear sandals. You're going to have tattered clothes. You're going to look like you've just been in the desert for 40 days fasting. And you need to look like you're kind of suffering. And so we were laughing about it, because he said, but then because you want to be rid of all attachments. He goes, but then the problem can also arise that you become attached to not having attachments.
Exactly.
Which I thought, wow, what a paradox. But this is the way our minds work. So the people that were more tattered and looked more disheveled and everything were more spiritually advanced and spiritually inclined. It is human nature, I think, to make comparison through our separation from each other. And there's nothing wrong with it. Just own it. Just own it. And it's fine. And whatever you choose is going to be your beautiful path.
I feel you, brother. Robert, once again, I love you, mate.
Thank you.
And
likewise, I love you too.
Really appreciate your time, and have a beautiful time in Egypt. And yeah, I look forward to watching your discoveries and your transformation.
Thank you very much, my friend. Best of luck to you and all the
Thank you.
best.
Thanks,
All right.
mate. Speak soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You too.